You're listening to the Visible Expert Podcast, where we share stories, research, and actionable insights to help B2B marketers and practitioners drive extraordinary growth in their professional lives. All right, thanks for tuning in to the Visible Expert Podcast. I'm John Tyerman.
And I'm Kelly Waffle.
And we have a very, very great guest today. We've got Vinay Bhagat on from TrustRadius. Check him out, TrustRadius.com. Connect with him on LinkedIn. He is a brilliant mind and CEO and business leader. And I took away a lot from our interview with him. My page is overflowing with notes.
My hand is still sore.
Yeah. So, Kelly, what were your initial thoughts, initial takeaways?
I don't even know where to start. So, Vinay, I think, like you said, add a richness to our discussion. Here's a guy that started up a company when he was 29 years old, worked it for many years, obviously made some mistakes, learned along the way, but he was able to sell that company years later for $325 million. And then he happened to be out shopping, and during the course of shopping and doing some research, he hit upon the idea that became the foundation for TrustRadius. So you'll have to listen to the podcast just to hear his story around that. But just great insights, I think, like you were saying, not only around his company, but around leadership, around how to build the right team. He goes into three responsibilities he feels like every CEO should have, which is well worth listening to. And then you and I both like the quote that he was talking about, turning the customer voice into a weapon. Yeah. And that's the power, I think, of customer review platforms like TrustRadius, what they bring to the table. What were your thoughts about the interview?
I thought that his perspective on the how he differentiates his company is really focused on accentuating the differentiators of his clients that he works with. And I really liked his truth acronym that he has kind of around the framework for which he approaches his business. So you'll have to check out what that stands for. Listen to what he says about that. And I love how he's so much of a fan of research and doing that research. And what he found in his research is consistent with what we're seeing in the marketplaces, what we're hearing from other thought leaders. So it was just great. And speaking of that research, he has a B2B disconnect study that his TrustRadius published, so check that out. And also, speaking of research, this episode is sponsored by the Hinge Research Institute. So if you're involved in marketing demand or lead generation and want to use a data-driven approach to content strategy, consider using Original Research. And the Hinge Research Institute offers a range of services from tiered sponsorships of original studies to custom research on specific industry challenges. We found that high-growth professional services firms are 3 times more likely than no-growth firms to using original research in their content strategy. And, according to Forbes, companies who adopt a data-driven approach to marketing are 6 times more likely to be profitable year over year. So if you're interested in learning more, email us at research@hingemarketing.com and we'll find the right approach to using original research for you. All right, well, I think we should just jump right into the interview.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
Our guest today is Vinay Bhagat, founder and CEO of TrustRadius. Welcome to the Visible Expert Podcast, Vinay.
Thank you, Kelly. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Before we get too far into this interview, John and I want to congratulate you and your team for recently completing the $12.5 million Series C round of funding.
Thank you so much.
Great accomplishment. Vinay, here at Hinge, we define influencers in the B2B space as visible experts. So with this podcast, we try to focus on the stories of our guests and really illuminate their individual journeys. I've read a little bit about you, and I would really love it if you could spend a few minutes discussing your journey from starting your first company at 29 to then going on to found TrustRadius. If you could go in and tell that story, and please do not leave out the part about shopping for the high-end coffee machine for your wife.
Okay, absolutely. So my first company, Convio, was an online fundraising and marketing platform for the nonprofit sector. Over the course of 12 years, we grew the company from zero to almost 100 million in revenue, 450 employees. And globally, when we started the business, less than $100 million was raised online a year. By the time we exited, we ourselves were doing close to $2 billion a year in fundraising for the charity sector, mostly in the US. So a lot of lessons were learned along the way in that company in terms of really driving change in an industry. A lot of people thought I was crazy when I started Convio, that, how can you possibly, build a platform in a market that is not for profit? And secondly, driving change within the industry itself that had a lot of inertia about how it operated. Online fundraising was not a fact when I started the company. In fact, less than 15% of the nonprofits I interviewed even had a website, let alone took donations, let alone had a proactive stance on raising money. So I became very, very attuned to how one builds a category and how one drives change in an industry. And I personally find that incredibly satisfying. And I also find it incredibly satisfying when you can build a real business, you can create economic wealth, you can employ people, you can create jobs, but you can also do good. So that's sort of, a lot of lessons learned from that experience, but that's what really kind of I'm most proud of. Towards the end of the company, so we took the company public in 2010 on NASDAQ, and then a couple of years later, a larger competitor, an incumbent in our industry in the fundraising space, acquired us for $325 million. But while we were in that sort of last couple of year phase before being acquired, we started to buy a lot of systems at my company. One particular system was an HR system that we signed a $300,000 contract over 3 years. My HR team did the traditional forms of research. They looked at Gartner reports. They spoke to the salesperson. They spoke to the references provided by the salesperson. And the product, as we rolled it out, we found that it had a fatal flaw in terms of how it handled vacation policies that didn't fit our business. When I asked my HR team, how did we make this mistake? They did all the right things, at least by most people's measures in their research, but they didn't have the ability to really dig in and understand if the product would work for our unique use case. As I started to look at all the IT purchases we'd made across our business, I saw a recurring theme of a degree of buyer's remorse, where people would always say, I wish I knew this before we bought it. I wish I knew it was so hard to implement. I wish I knew the TCO would be what it is, that it's higher cost to maintain. Or in one case, for marketing automation, we bought the wrong platform and then switched it out a year or two later. And so what I saw was just a lack of transparency in the enterprise for making business decisions. And these are the business decisions that are highly consequential, that could run in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars of economic value, could cause, a suck in productivity. And these are evaluations that took many months to complete. Around the time I was selling my company, I was buying a gift for my wife. I wanted to get a cappuccino machine. I walked into Williams-Sonoma. The salesperson did his job and tried to sell me a product they had in the store. I didn't trust that I was necessarily getting neutral, objective advice. And I asked a friend of mine, for advice, and he suggested a brand called Jura, a Swiss brand. And I Googled the products because, as much as I trusted my friend's advice, I wanted some more opinions. And I found reviews on sites like Costco and Amazon that were fine. And then I found a site called Coffee Geeks that had, incredibly detailed reviews that explained in excruciating detail what it's like to own one of the machines, to maintain it, how to deal with the supplier if you have a problem. And this was an appliance that cost around $1,500. And I was just blown away by the level of intelligence I could find about a home appliance, whereas for a piece of enterprise software that cost my company $300,000 over 3 years, we couldn't find anywhere near that level of transparency and information. And it just blew my mind. And that really led me to start TrustRadius, both feeling the pain as a buyer of technology and also seeing the stark contrast between how consumers can buy and how enterprises could buy.
Yeah, Vinay, you talk about buyer's remorse and, I wish I knew X, Y, and Z about a certain product before I buy. And customer review platforms, they're still new to many B2B marketers. How would you say that, leaning on the lessons learned in the B2C space, how can these B2B marketers leverage a platform like TrustRadius in their overall marketing plan?
I think it starts with recognizing that the world has already changed. Mm-hmm. Buyers no longer carte blanche trust marketing. In fact, year on year, we do a study called the B2B Disconnect, and the data is already clear. There has been a precipitating year-on-year decline in the trust in salespeople. In terms of you'll get the whole truth from them. There's been a year-on-year decline in the trust of marketing-produced content, even case studies that are the customer's voice, but everybody knows they're highly cherry-picked, they're highly curated, they only sell one side of the story. What buyers crave and are finding on their own is the whole truth. Nobody wants to enter a relationship, whether it's an employment relationship, a marriage, or software, without knowing the whole truth about what they're entering into. They want to know the good with the bad. Let's face it, no piece of software or hardware is perfect. Every piece of software may be purpose fit for a specific use case or a set of use cases and maybe less ideal for others. Maybe it's optimized for a small business or for an enterprise. Maybe it works well in North America, but not well in Germany. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into determining whether a product is going to be fit for purpose for a specific company. So what technology buyers are craving is honest, whole insights from people they can trust, and they can trust their peers. They don't trust what a brand has to say carte blanche. They trust analysts to a degree, but let's face it, analysts are pretty removed from the trenches. I liken relying on an analyst to, let's say you had a really important dinner to plan, let's say an anniversary dinner or a celebration. Would you pick a restaurant based upon someone's advice who'd never dined at any of the restaurant choices themselves, but had only spoken to the maitre d's and maybe some of the clientele? That's kind of the advice that you get when you speak to an analyst. Yes, they are an expert, they spend time in a sector, but they don't live in the trenches of knowing what it's like to work with that product day in, day out. And they certainly don't live in the trenches for every use case in every context and every company. So in the particular case of the HR product we bought, it was a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and it is a good product. It just wasn't the right product for our specific use case based upon our hyper-specific needs. And so, again, what buyers are craving is clarity around whether the product's going to work for their use case and the whole truth. The number one reason why people come to my site is that they want to see the cons as well as the pros, and they want to understand if the cons are severe enough to eliminate a product from consideration. They come to my site to prepare for a meeting with a salesperson, to be able to ask probing questions, They come to my site after they have a meeting with a salesperson to validate whether the claims being made by the salesperson are correct. And so buyers want that. Now, as a vendor, you really have a couple of things you need to do. One is you need to realize that this phenomenon is happening, that people no longer just trust you carte blanche. They don't trust spin. They don't trust just brand positioning that's not backed up. Because let's face it, a lot of brands use the same messaging. Everybody is scalable. Everybody has world-class support. Everybody's configurable. Everybody supposedly integrates to the same set of tools. So it's incredibly hard for the buyer to understand truth and to be able to discern the differences between products. So they are coming to a platform like mine to learn that truth and understand the differences between products. But what a vendor has to do first and foremost is to make sure that it is represented in the key principal venues where people go to shop and do their analysis, and to make sure that they've got a statistically significant number of data points such that if I'm a fin services company and I come to TrustRadius, I can find fin services examples. If I'm a retailer, I can find retail examples, etc., because people want a pattern match. And they also need to make sure that they are telling their unique story. So if they really excel as an enterprise-grade solution because they have better security and governance, let's not leave that to chance that people will say that in reviews. Let's actually guide the reviewer in order to enumerate those points of difference and help buyers discern the differences between products more clearly. The other side of this is understanding how to put customer voice content to work in your own channels as a company. Because let's face it, most complex B2B products are still sold, not bought. If I'm traveling to, I'm going to Barcelona on Friday. If I'm traveling to Barcelona, I'm going to spend 90% of my time on TripAdvisor, reading reviews and getting objective advice. I might visit the hotel website. I'm probably not going to speak to the hotel to make my decision before I book. I make my decision largely based upon reviews. If I'm buying a complex piece of technology, reviews are incredibly important. In fact, 55% of B2B buyers today do rely on reviews as part of their decision-making framework. But they also want to see the product. They also want to demo it. They also want to speak to the company as well. And so in a world where we're dealing with hyper-complex products that are still sold, not bought, we have found that brands who embrace transparency, get their customers on the record, and then actually use that content in their own channels to back up their claims, whether that's in a piece of marketing collateral, whether that's on a landing page, whether that's in a nurture message or in a piece of sales dialogue, they engender more trust with their buyers because they're giving the buyer what they want, which is an honest, backed up claim where someone can go and read kind of both the pros and the cons of the solution and get more confident that they're making the right decision.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Vinay, your platform seems like it would have a great appeal for a variety of technology buyers and sellers, as you were just saying. What industries are you seeing engaging a lot with TrustRadius lately?
We cover about 4,000 to 5,000 products at this point in time and have what we call trust maps, market visuals, to help people narrow down their shortlist in about 150 categories. So we have pretty broad market coverage across a lot of different areas. I would say kind of the first movers have been SaaS products. Mm-hmm. Naturally, SaaS lends itself to peer review because the barrier to adopt is low, the barrier to switch is low in many cases as well. So, in a world where you're not locked into a solution in perpetuity, people are really keen to understand, are they on the right platform and could they do better? So SaaS has been sort of, I'd say, the leading category. Of course, within SaaS, there are thousands of different, product categories. And then, we're increasingly working with hardware companies and converged companies that are doing a hybrid job of hardware and software where, again, these are complex decisions and people are craving peer advice. Where TrustRadius really excels is that, we lead the industry in terms of depth and quality of content. So if I'm buying, a really simple transactional product where the consequences of making a bad decision are not very high, it's a commodity, TrustRadius may not be the ideal place to really get guidance. Where we really excel is where it's a considered purchase, where it's either expensive or there's a material consequence to making a bad decision, where it could be accounting software, where even though most accounting products are pretty inexpensive, I don't want to have to go through the pain of switching after I bought a solution. So where we excel is when people really want to understand the nuance and the detail about a product. A lot of the review space has now gravitated towards being a ratings war, where people are competing for scores. I think that's really doing buyers a disservice, because you can't really boil things down to a score. Just to give you a real life example of that, in a sector like iPaaS, data integration, you can have some really inexpensive, simple tools that score really, really well, and score above more complex enterprise grade tools. But it doesn't mean they're a better product. It just means that on average, their buyers score them higher, but they're solving a much simpler use case. And what I think is incredibly important, and what we see this in our own buyer research, is helping people understand what product is right for their use case, and then the details around, will it integrate? Why did you pick that product over another product? What sort of ROI has it delivered for you? What are the gotchas that I need to know about this product before I buy it? That's what we see buyers really, really wanting, and that's the need in the marketplace that we're trying to uniquely fulfill.
Vinay, you mentioned your research shows a decline in trust and a decline in trust in marketing produced content. We had Mark Schaefer on the podcast a few weeks ago, who also talked about a decline in loyalty. Our own research here at Hinge shows that even in professional services, buyers are less loyal to their service providers than they were just 5 years ago. So I think that there's a need, and there's definitely a market shift that's happening. We spend a lot of time helping our own clients differentiate themselves from others. And these differentiators are essential to making our clients memorable, appealing, and trusted. How is TrustRadius differentiating yourself today?
Well, buyers crave discernment between products, and vendors crave the ability to differentiate them from the competition too. So we are uniquely capable of addressing that discrete problem. So while most review sites content is incredibly shallow, maybe 30, 40, 80, 100 words, and again, what they're really optimized around is capturing ratings, capturing high-level sentiment, and then using that really just to attract eyeballs that they can monetize in a variety of ways, like paid lead generation. Our focus is truly on trying to help be a research platform for the buyer at every stage of the buyer's journey. People come to my site when they are trying to identify who may be the universe of products that they should shortlist. How do they narrow and compare products side by side? When they're prepping for a meeting with a vendor, to ask the right questions, post a meeting to validate their questions. We even have people who come to my site to do business justification, where they picked a solution and they want to justify to their peers or to their boss why they've picked the solution. And they'll literally, take content from my site and build an internal business case. And so you can't do that unless the content is rich and useful. So where we differentiate ourselves very starkly in the marketplace is on the quality of our content. Our reviews tend to be 4 to 5 times more robust in terms of length of other sites. There's a lot more substance there when you're dealing with a considered purchase. And then secondly, we help brands tell their narrative. So we don't just ask our standard questions. We will partner with a company to ask directive questions that help them enumerate their points of difference. And so if a company really has better mobile support than another company, or if they have a better user interface or better support, we will try and highlight that by asking the reviewer what we call custom questions to help enumerate those points of difference. We believe doing so is both a service to the buyer, who can now tell the differences between products more easily, and a service to the vendor because we're helping them differentiate themselves. So that's our first point of differentiation. A second point of differentiation is our audience. 42% of our audience are companies above 1,000 employees. We skew more enterprise and mid-market than other sites. Again, I think it's because of the quality of our content. And then thirdly, our ethos around that content should be portable and usable in other channels. So I don't believe that, again, we're a hotel. Most of the products on our site are like a hotel purchase where someone is purely going to self-serve and rely on review sites to do their diligence. The salesperson still has a role. The demand gen person still has a role in kind of creating intent and interest in the first place. And so we spend a lot of time and energy helping the brands that we work with take content from TrustRadius and use it in their own go-to-market channels. To give you one example of that, we work with a security vendor called Alien Vault. They have a fairly high velocity model, 30-day sales cycles, but they have found that using content from TrustRadius on their own digital properties have increased conversion on average 29%. So if 100 people would have converted before on a landing page, they're getting roughly 30% more people to convert each time because of that third-party social proof. We enable them to put the right content in the right place. So if I'm coming in from a federal institution versus a bank, I will see different content. We also help them use that content in sales. So we help them. We have a Salesforce integration that puts the content into Salesforce and makes dynamic recommendations to the salesperson as to what content they should be using when they're facing a specific competitor or if they're facing a certain objective. So we help them turn their customer's voice into a weapon. Then I'd say another kind of use case difference is because the content is high quality, demonstrably high quality than other sites, a lot of companies find tremendous value in the business insights that we deliver to them. A CEO that I know well at a company called Matillion in the ETL space said to him, the largest value is the feedback and the insights that we're getting from our customer reviews that can help us chart a better course in terms of our product roadmap. We work with SolarWinds in the IT monitoring space that tell us that the feedback from TrustRadius has helped them position their products more effectively. They may have been emphasizing certain features previously, and their customer reviews suggested that they were maybe under-marketing other features that customers really valued.
I'm just taking some notes here. Vinay, as a successful tech entrepreneur who has now started a couple of companies, I'm really curious as to what advice or insights you can give around leadership and team building.
I think as a leader, as a CEO, you've really got kind of three kind of core responsibilities: building your first team, charting the right course strategically, making sure you have adequate resources, and then driving culture at the company. And, I would say I'm a work in progress in terms of trying to be sort of an excellent tech CEO, but the thing that I've really focused on is making sure I have the right first team. The reality is that most high growth companies do outgrow people on the team periodically. And you have to have the courage and the honesty to be able to have direct conversations with people on your team about whether they're meeting your expectations or not and hitting the mark, and be prepared to make those changes on a periodic basis to make sure you have the right first team. And part of building the first team is not just ensuring that you have the right people, but you have the right dynamic around how they challenge each other and push each other. An ideal environment is where I can go away for 2 weeks, which is what I'm about to do, and feel confident that the ops team are still going to be executing and challenging each other just as if I weren't there. Strategy is obviously really critically important whenever you're taking a new concept to market versus just trying to build a better solution for an existing well-understood problem. There are not a lot of complex waters to navigate, everything from, where do you spend your product dollars to have the biggest bang, how quickly you should pursue an opportunity versus let the market mature. The course to finding product market fit is a non-trivial problem. And, when people say product market fit is black and white, I always disagree. I think of it in terms of shades of gray, where, you may have product market fit, but you're always striving for more expansive fit and more expansive fit in more segments as well. And then, of course, making sure the company has the resources it needs to proceed and is financially prudent and fiscally well managed. One of the lessons I took from my last company was, while we were very successful and made our investors a lot of money, we could have done even better had we spent less. We raised about $40 million before our IPO, and in hindsight, I think we could have done it for half that amount. And so I've managed TrustRadius just a lot more tightly this time around. I bootstrapped for a year before I raised venture capital. I got cash flow positive before I raised my Series B. I've kept my burn really under control this time around. And it's because I believe, I'm doing that for two reasons. One is to not just preserve ownership, but also to create discipline around spending money, that I really am very focused on our unit economics and our metrics before we hit the gas too hard. All too often, people reward growth, but that growth is not done well. It's not done with good unit economics, and it's not done in such a way that it's sustainable. And so, fundamentally, my philosophy in business is that in most markets, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's actually okay to be a fast follower sometimes, as long as you do things the right way. And so that's my overall kind of philosophy in terms of leadership. And on culture, we certainly have placed an emphasis on kind of core values. We've got a value framework, which we use here at the company, centered around 5 key principles. We use the acronym TRUTH.
Okay.
And that stands for transparency, respect, unstoppable, team, and teamwork and human. But to kind of dig into a couple of those areas, one of my philosophies as a leader is treat people as adults and be incredibly transparent. Be transparent not just about what's going well, but what's going poorly, because you need to enlist your whole team to help you solve those problems. And they cannot do that unless they understand what's wrong and needs to be fixed or improved. And they cannot do that unless they have clarity in terms of the company's objectives and key results and how they can actually contribute to that success. So that as a core value has been very important to me. We get kudos for that all the time in terms of our employee feedback. And then the other thing that, frankly, I think is incredibly important at a startup is building urgency and building this gene around being unstoppable. I personally think people want to be challenged. They want to be led. They want to be pushed. It doesn't mean that we don't desire work-life balance, but it just means that we're trying to create an aura of intensity where decisions get made quickly, where we have a growth mindset, we learn and we iterate and we improve. And we want people to work at their career best, to be their best versions of themselves. And so that's really, really important to me.
That's great, Vinay. And, we talk a lot here about having a growth mindset, and growth starts with the individual. And so running close on time, but I've got one last question for you. Speaking of that growth mindset and growing as an individual, what advice would you give to CEOs looking to build their personal brand and influence within their target market?
In terms of brand building, it's so easy these days to actually, communicate through social channels and establish a voice on channels like LinkedIn, but you've just got to commit to it and carve out time. Have a point of view. be appropriately contrarian, challenge the status quo, but do it with data. But my view, in this area is that it all comes down to having clear conviction about, your belief set and where you believe the world is changing and where you believe markets need to evolve, and kind of stick to your gun and be consistent there. For example, in my world, we have a dramatically different approach to go to market and our positioning than other quote unquote review sites. I get lumped in with them, but my business model is different. My philosophy is different, and our value proposition is different. Sometimes being different is hard. Sometimes it's easy to just kind of ride a wave. But if you have courage in your convictions and you truly believe something, the course that you're charting is the right course because you are, going back to first principles and you've got conviction as to why you started something in the first place, you got to stick to it. So I think it comes down to first having, courage of your convictions, driving your business based upon first principles, listening to markets, listening to customers, and then staying on message from a communications perspective and being okay with being public and being transparent and being commercial and being your authentic self. That's what I strive to do. When we were doing some PR a couple of years ago, I had a reporter, I believe it was at Inc., who we pitched something about, how brands need to be truthful, and came back to us and said, well, tell us, why don't you tell us about yourself and what your weaknesses are? And we leapt at that opportunity, and I actually did an interview with a reporter where I not only told about where my company needed to improve, but where I as a human being needed to improve. And I got a lot of kudos on that because too many people are worried about facade versus just being their authentic self. And I think, again, people in markets respond to companies who are authentic and respond to people who are authentic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's fantastic. And Vinay, for our listeners who want to learn more about TrustRadius and about your story, where can they go to learn more?
Certainly TrustRadius.com. We have several kind of blogs off the side in terms of if whether you're a technology marketer or you're just someone who's just interested in the markets that we cover. We've got a lot of great blog content and research. We have a fantastic research study called the B2B Disconnect that we're very proud of, and it's sort of an annual pulse on B2B buying trends and the disconnect between buyers and sellers. So I highly recommend reading that report. I think there's a lot of interesting gems and nuggets in there. And, if you'd like to connect with me, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a dialogue as well.
It's fantastic. Well, we love research over here at Hinge, so I'm going to have to download that report and study up.
Awesome. Hope you like it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on our show. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
This has been great. My hand hurts from taking so many notes, Vinay, so I really appreciated this.
You're most welcome. I enjoyed it.
All right, and that was our interview with Vinay Bhagat. Check him out at TrustRadius.com. Connect with him on LinkedIn. And if you're listening to this, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us out, helps us reach a broader audience, and helps our guests share their story with a broader audience as well. Kelly, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I just found this to be a really interesting interview, a little bit different than the norm of what we do, get kind of more of a CEO's perspective. And he was even engaging at the end, giving us tips on personal branding and things like that. So, I would encourage every executive out there maybe to listen to this broadcast a couple times and be able to apply some of this as they're trying to grow their organizations.
Totally agree. And if you know anybody that's on a research team in Antarctica, we're still looking for a listener on that seventh continent.
Please.
All right, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.